Here's the version of frame for my BB20A. It's got some shortcomings, but let's first see how I got to this point. The first consideration is the length of the frame based upon the length of the shell. So there is the mock-up of the BB20A. The next consideration is the width, and the width that I chose was the same as the Athearn frames. The next consideration is the depth of the sill. So I'm using some square brass stock, and I'll give you the dimensions here in a minute. But that gives me a sill depth that's greater than the Athearn units. My first attempt at the drivetrain for this locomotive, I wanted to use all Athearn Blue Box components. So what you can see here are two Athearn trucks and the associated Athearn drive worm gears. I had to fabricate a custom drive shaft for the longer length between the two worm gears. The trucks themselves are mounted onto a span bolster, and then that span bolster goes onto the kingpin mount, which crosses the frame. All of those are screwed in from below. The problem with this setup is there's just too much rocking motion. I'm going to have to put up some kind of a friction pad to limit the rocking motion. To determine the position of the span bolster kingpins, I first wanted to see what the maximum distance apart was for the trucks under the shell. So I've put the shell over the trucks and moved it out as far as I could. I then brought the frame up next to the span bolsters and marked the center position between the two trucks on the span bolster. So that's how I determined where the span bolster kingpin was going to go. Once that kingpin cross member was in, I then drilled a hole and used some brass tubing to create the kingpin itself. On the span bolsters, I had to enlarge the hole on the span bolster to go over the kingpin, but now I'm afraid I have a weak spot there, so I'm going to have to reinforce the span bolster. So the first version of the chassis that I make, it has too much body roll. I need to put some kind of a bearing surface here on the trucks that'll meet the frame to stop that roll. I currently have a lot of space here, so I think the first thing I'm going to do is try and raise the bolster kingpin. So I've cut some more brass stock, the same thickness as the bolster kingpin cross brace, and I'll solder that on and then put the kingpin back on. We'll then check for the bearing clearance. With the bolster kingpin raised, I now have zero clearance between the frame and the trucks. That's going to be a problem both for flexibility over rough track and because I will get conduction from the north rail to the south rail through the frame unless I insulate these bearing points. So a little more refinement is necessary. I think what I'm going to do is probably put in an insulated washer on the bolster kingpin and insulate the underneath side of the frame from the trucks. So to insulate the frame, I've found some clear acetate and I've supered the underside of the frame.